Welcome to the Deep Dives. We are taking the sources you shared and giving you the fastest route to being well-informed. Today, we're tackling a feeling that is almost universally common, yet somehow remains just deeply, deeply frustrating. It's that intense wave of worry, stress, or even, panic that hits you when you have to speak English or any second language, really, in front of other people.
It's an incredibly specific phenomenon, isn't it? We're talking about that anxiety that just pops up everywhere, raising your hand in a classroom, a high-stakes business meeting, or even as trying to order a coffee. And it feels like a language hurdle, but, our sources are absolutely unanimous on this.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally a human stress response.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack the psychology and, well, the biology behind this specific fear. We're going to treat it not as a sign of your language ability, but as a completely natural mechanism in the brain that's just misfiring.
And that is the crucial starting point for you, the listener. It really is. If you experience this fear, it does not mean you're bad at English or that you're unintelligent or incapable of learning. You just need to drop that idea right now.
Wow. That feels like a huge truth bomb to drop right at the beginning. But how do we convince someone of that when they've spent years, maybe, being told the exact opposite in a classroom? Implicitly or explicitly?
We use the science. The anxiety means your brain is perceiving a threat. It's activating these ancient protection mechanisms. It has absolutely nothing to do with your vocabulary size or your TOEFL score. It's just self-preservation, but, applied to a language task.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's drill down into the specifics. If it's this primal threat response, what are the triggers? I think the sources we have identified, four main psychological roots that consistently lead to this linguistic silence.
The first, and honestly the most potent, is the simple, crushing fear of judgment.
Right, but let's elaborate on that, on judgment. It's not just the fear of being corrected, is it? It's that you fear others will, internally catalog your errors, that they might laugh or, and this is the real core of the shame, that they will conclude you are slow or uneducated just because your English isn't perfect.
That perceived spotlight is just so intense. In your native language, you can make a mistake and you just brush it off. Your identity is secure. But in English, you feel like you're under a microscope, and every tiny error reflects badly on your core intelligence.
Which flows perfectly into the second root, the fear of making mistakes. And it sounds a bit redundant, but it's deeper, right? Our sources show that for a lot of L2 speakers, mistakes aren't just errors. They're equated with failure, with shame, with public embarrassment.
That's because those simple linguistic errors, like a wrong verb tense or mixing up a preposition, they get connected to this intensely felt emotional pain from things that happened in the past. The brain just registers the context. Speaking English equals potential shame. So silence becomes the default. It's protective. It's a logical response. The goal isn't communication anymore. It's pain avoidance.
Wow. If the brain is treating a grammatical slip-up like a physical attack, it explains why just trying harder is so useless. That brings us to the third root, which I find genuinely fascinating, the fear of losing control.
Well, think about the fluidity you have in your first language. You're driving the conversation, you're choosing the words, setting the pace, you have complete cognitive control. When you switch to English, that whole system, it just destabilizes instantly.
You forget the perfect word, you stumble, the whole sentence structure just collapses while you're saying it. It feels like the rug's been pulled out from under you.
Exactly. You might speak slower, you might misunderstand a question, or fail to articulate a really nuanced idea. This sudden loss of linguistic agency, it just spikes anxiety because control is so intrinsically linked to competence and safety. The brain registers, I'm not performing at my best, which means I am vulnerable.
And finally, that vulnerability is often reinforced by the ghost of bad experiences past. Can one single moment of public failure really derail years of learning?
Oh, absolutely. The memory of emotional pain is highly, highly potent. A single instance, being corrected really harshly by a teacher, having your friends laugh, or even worse, being ignored when you finally spoke up, that can create a long-term neurological association. The amygdala flags that environment, the meeting room, the classroom, as an active threat zone. It generates powerful anxiety the next time you even step into it. It's like an emotional scar.
So we've established the psychological layers, the fears of judgment, error, loss of control, and these scarring memories. But let's connect this to the cold, hard biology. What's actually happening in our bodies when the mind treats a presentation like a lion attack?
This is the stress response in action, pure and simple. When the brain flags speaking English as dangerous, the hypothalamus activates the HPA axis and it just floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline. This happens instantly. It doesn't matter how prepared you are linguistically.
And that biological surge is what causes those classic physical symptoms we all know.
Precisely. That racing heart, the dry mouth, the shaky voice, and the infamous cognitive freeze, your mind just going completely blank. And what's critical for you to understand is why the mind goes blank. Your brain has diverted all its resources away from non-essential functions, like complex language retrieval, and dedicated them to survival.
So the reason I forget a simple word like apologize during a tense negotiation isn't because I don't know the word. It's because my internal system has literally paused language production to prepare for fight or flight.
That's the mechanism. It's biology focusing on immediate survival, not on sophisticated grammar. And then we layer on top of this the whole identity issue. Why does English feel so much more vulnerable than your native language?
Because your native language it's part of you. Your sense of self, your humor, your whole history. English feels external.
Right. And our sources highlight that using English often forces the speaker into a kind of weaker version or less confident self. They might feel really articulate and witty in their L1, but in English, they're slower, less expressive. That contrast, that mismatch between your true self and your linguistic performance, it causes a massive drop in self-esteem and just feeds that anxiety loop.
And then there's just the simple mechanics of speed. I mean, thinking in L2 is just slower, full stop.
Yes. When you're translating, retrieving words, structuring sentences all at once, it takes more cognitive time. That resulting silence, while it's completely normal for L2 processing, it feels terrifying in a public setting. It feels like everyone is staring at that pause, just confirming your worst fears about your competence.
And we really can't discuss this fear of speaking without talking about the immense social and cultural pressure, particularly around the accent. This area needs a real deep dive.
This is maybe the most insidious factor because it's entirely rooted in external harmful bias. So many people fear their accent or any deviation from a so-called standard English because of the deeply held but objectively false belief that having an accent means you have low intelligence or a poor education.
It's a global phenomenon. And if you believe that your accent is signaling to the world that you are less smart than you really are, you will do anything to avoid broadcasting that signal.
The sources strongly suggest reframing this internal narrative. An accent is not a marker of intellectual weakness. It is tangible evidence of linguistic complexity, of hard work, of bravery. You're navigating two or more complex systems at the same time. Your accent is proof that you have mastered a second language, yet social bias makes us feel like we have to apologize for it.
I understand the theory of reframing, but in practice, you're still walking into rooms where that bias exists.
Yeah.
So how does the learner protect themselves from the comparison trap? Because in public, we naturally compare ourselves to the most fluent speakers in the room, and that comparison it severely amplifies the fear.
The key is shifting the goalpost. Comparison is only toxic when your goal is flawless performance. If your goal is effective communication, which is the goal of 99% of conversations, then comparison becomes irrelevant. But this is where the system so often fails us.
Let's pivot to that systemic issue, the classroom factor. We have to explore how our educational systems often, unintentionally lay the groundwork for this deep-seated anxiety.
Yeah, the source materials clearly point out a huge disconnect. Traditional education prioritizes grammar accuracy, passing exams, and heavy visible correction. They're optimizing for, textual perfection, but they often neglect the critical components of actual communication: speaking, confidence, flow, and, most importantly, emotional safety.
It creates a culture where the red pen is more powerful than a conversational success. And the problem of overcorrection is a perfect example of this.
Well, if a teacher, or worse, a classmate, constantly interrupts to fix every minor error in real time, the learner internalizes one devastating message, and that is, it is not safe to speak unless I am perfect. This belief is such a devastating progress blocker because perfect isn't achievable. It's not even necessary for connection.
And if you internalize that fear, it leads directly to the most destructive consequence, which is the vicious cycle of avoidance. You avoid speaking opportunities, you stay silent even when you know the answer. You choose roles where you don't have to present.
And that avoidance creates a terrifying feedback loop. Fear triggers silence. Silence means no practice. No practice means no improvement. And no improvement inevitably leads to more fear. You're effectively training your brain to be terrified of the only action that could possibly lead to improvement. It just solidifies the anxiety.
So how do we break the chain? We need to pivot now to the actionable truths found in the source material, starting with that necessary mental reframing.
The solution begins with challenging the very premise of the fear. So truth number one, communication is infinitely more important than perfection. 99% of your audience is focused on understanding the meaning of your message. They are not cataloging your grammatical slip-ups. They're listening for content, while you, the speaker, are just obsessed with form.
That is a fundamental perspective shift for someone who has always been graded on form.
It is. And truth number two gives you permission to relax. Even fluent speakers and native speakers make errors. They pause. They use filler words like and like. They sometimes forget basic words, and they backtrack mid-sentence. That is normal speech. Your expectation of flawless performance is based on an unrealistic ideal that doesn't even exist for native speakers.
And truth number three challenges the main reason people stall their progress, the confidence myth. So many people wait, believing they need to feel confident before they can step up and speak.
And that is the trap. The sources confirm that confidence does not arrive before the action. It is a neurological byproduct of having acted, of having survived the interaction, and having successfully communicated. You have to act your way into feeling confident. You can't wait for the feeling to arrive before you act.
So I have to feel terrified,
Yeah.
but do it anyway. That sounds easier said than done. What's the core strategy for making that action manageable?
The core actionable strategy is gradual exposure. And when we say gradual, we mean small, deliberate, repeated steps. They're specifically designed to retrain your stress response system. We are not asking for a sudden heroic jump into leading a board meeting.
Okay, can you give us some concrete examples of what tiny actually looks like? Because I think people often skip the tiny steps and try for the medium ones, which just reinforces the failure and the fear.
Tiny means an action that pushes you just past your comfort zone, but not into full-blown panic. So, for example, it might be speaking one single sentence during a meeting. It could be asking one simple clarifying question. It could be reading a short email aloud to yourself, or having a very short one-on-one chat with a supportive colleague. The goal of each step is simple: to prove to your survival brain, I spoke, I survived, I am safe.
And that neurological victory is what starts chipping away at the fear association.
And the environment is critical to these small victories. It really is. Safe environments where you're supported, where listeners are patient, they reduce fear almost instantly. Unsafe environments, defined by mocking or aggressive correction, they will immediately sabotage all your progress. Choose your practice spaces wisely.
And finally, we have to tackle the enemy in our own head. That harsh self-talk, that internal monologue that just screams, "You sound stupid," or "Everyone is judging you right now."
We have to actively replace those toxic narratives. The source material suggests building healthier self-talk phrases and repeating them almost like affirmations. I am learning. Mistakes are allowed because they are proof of effort. Or, my favorite one, my message matters more than my grammar. These phrases slowly chip away at the emotional pain your brain has associated with speaking. You're reframing the challenge from linguistic failure to emotional training.
That's a powerful distinction. Because if we adopt this long-term perspective, speaking English in public becomes a skill like cycling or cooking, built through repetition, not a talent you're born with.
Exactly. The fear won't just disappear completely, but it will slowly lose its power. Every small, safe interaction teaches your brain that the situation is, in fact, not dangerous. You're simply retraining an ancient survival mechanism that is overreacting to a modern social task.
So what does this all synthesize into for you, the learner? Let's distill that core insight one last time.
The fear of speaking English in public is a human fear of judgment and comparison, just wrapped up in a second language. Your brain is trying to protect you. And by recognizing this, you move away from that paralyzing thought, I'm bad at English, and toward the empowering realization, my brain is trainable, and I can systematically reduce this fear through small, safe, repetitive action.
What's so fascinating here is the broad application of this survival mode concept. If this specific fear is fundamentally about judgment, comparison, and protecting a perceived identity, then think about this. What other areas of your life beyond language acquisition are you avoiding or holding yourself back from simply because your brain is still operating in that outdated, high-alert survival mode? Something to chew on until our next deep dive.